Good morning, everyone. My name is Rui Laredo, and I am the Communications Director for Assemblywoman Luz Rivas. I want to let the press know in attendance that we will be taking questions through the Q&A function in the Zoom room, so please submit any questions in writing into that little chat box in Q&A, please, not the chat box. At the end of the press conference, I will go ahead and read any questions submitted to our panelists for them to answer it. We will try to get through as many questions as possible through the Q&A portion of the program. Thank you, and we will be getting started shortly.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today to unveil this important legislation. Again, as a reminder, if the press has questions, please put your questions at any time in the Q&A, and they will be read during the Q&A portion of our program. And we will try to answer as many questions as possible. I want to start by thanking our sponsors, the National Stewardship Action Council, for their partnership in this effort. My special thanks to my fellow joint authors, Assembly members Mark Stone and Connie Petrie Norris, for joining us here today. I also want to give thanks to all of my colleagues that have joined me in this effort and that are in attendance today, showing their support, including our principal co-author, Assembly member Cristina Garcia, and co-authors, Assembly members Tasha Berner Horvath, Laura Friedman, Alex Lee, Adrien Nazarian, Bill Quirk, and Senator Anthony Portantino. Of course, I also appreciate the support of my colleagues, including principal co-author, Assemblymember Phil Ting, and co-authors, Assembly members Rebecca Bauer-Cahan, Mark Berman, Buffy Wicks, as well as Senators Ben Allen, Josh Becker, Monique Limon, Josh Newman, and Scott Wiener. As you can see, we have a strong coalition of members that have joined us today for this bill. So for over half a century, single-use tobacco products have been nothing but a blight on our public health and environment. We're all familiar with the health hazards that cigarettes and cigars cause, such as lung cancer, heart disease, emphysema, mouth cancer, strokes, the laundry list goes on and on. But that's not all. The toxic waste that cigarettes and cigars leave behind in the form of tobacco filters wreak havoc on our environment. Of the 6 trillion cigarettes consumed worldwide, 4.5 trillion cigarette filters are littered into the environment every year, jeopardizing the health of our oceans, soils, and wildlife. Tobacco filters don't just threaten our wildlife, our young children and pets are also at risk of ingesting them and then suffer from nicotine poisoning. And the damage doesn't stop there. Tobacco filters are non-biodegradable, eventually break down into microplastics over time, while single-use vapes can contain hazardous chemicals and toxins, all of which that seep into our environment every single day. Cigarette filters and single-use vapes also poison the soils that grow our food and are used for our parks. And like every other environmental hazard, tobacco and vape waste are an environmental justice issue that disproportionately affects low-income and minority communities, like my own district. It's always disheartening to see cigarette and vape litter in our parks and streets in the San Fernando Valley. And we're already bearing the brunt of so many other problems. So why do we keep allowing this to happen? Why have we let the tobacco industry pollute our oceans and soils, injure our children and pets, and kill our already at-risk wildlife? There's no justification for it. And that's why we must act now and get rid of a decades-long pollutant and health hazard. That's why I'm here today to introduce AB 1690 to keep California healthy and clean by prohibiting the sale of both single-use electronic vaping devices and tobacco filters. Local authorities will be responsible for enforcing the bill, and anyone caught in violation will be charged with civil penalties of $500 per violation. AB 1690 comes on the heels of recommendations from the Ocean Protection Council and the Statewide Commission on Recycling Markets and Curbside Recycling. The Ocean Protection Council's statewide microplastics strategy recommended that California prohibit the sale of single-use tobacco products, including cigarette filters and electronic vapes. These single-use products also bear enormous costs on our local governments that can be avoided if we simply ban their sale. But I want to be clear, this bill is not banning the sale of tobacco and marijuana in California. That's not the goal of this bill. Given that there are reusable and less wasteful tobacco and marijuana products sold, AB 1690 specifically bans single-use products like vapes and tobacco filters. And California is not the only state in the country looking to pursue this type of ban on single-use tobacco products. I want to give a special shout out to Senator Liz Krueger, who represents the 28th Senate District in the New York legislature, for her work on introducing similar legislation to ban these single-use products in the state of New York. We will be working in tandem to ensure that we keep our states healthy and clean and send a message to the country that this is the year to get the single-use ban in place. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to our subject matter expert, Heidi Sanborn, the Executive Director of the National Stewardship Council. Welcome, Heidi.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Rivas. It's so great to be here, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I just first want to give you a quick background. The National Stewardship Action Council is a 501c4. We run bills here in California and then bring them to the nation. In fact, we did that with several bills from last year on truth in labeling for flushable wipes and recycling. And now they're both, one's going to be introduced in Congress, the other one already has been on the wipes. So we hope to do that with this bill. And we're incredibly grateful to the 18 authors and our 3 primary authors for carrying this important bill. We've started down this road years ago, and this bill is not the first time we've tried to do something about it. Assemblymember Stone and Senator Jackson, who has left the legislature, they have both really worked hard trying to get attention on this issue for a long time. We think with all these co-authors now, it's really time. We feel the momentum, and we're very excited to run it this year. And with your help, we will get it passed. So what does this bill cover? There's a lot of tobacco products on the market now, but everybody's most familiar with the common cigarette. A lot of people think that these filters, the yellow part and the contained in the paper, are paper, but they are not. They are mostly a type of cellulose acetate, which is a plastic. And so because they're on fire, people throw them on the ground, they step on them, and they break this into microplastics, which then release toxins, and it gets into the stormwater runoff, and it's a pollution problem. It has been for a long time, and the ocean advocates will tell you how big of a problem it is at the ocean and on beaches. So that's one product. This is considered single use. Now, cigarettes could be sold without filters, that's fine, but not with filters from this bill. Next slide, please. So the next type of product is these plastic filters for cigars, tiparillos. We find them littered all over. I have a park outside of my home, and I pick these up all the time. So those would be banned from sale in California as well. Next slide, please. And then the single-use electronic vaping products. They can be used for a variety of materials, tobacco, cannabis, and we're not targeting the content. We're targeting the actual product, the vaping product. These are being found at schools. Schools are having to handle them as hazardous waste, adding to their costs. We're finding them everywhere. Every cleanup I go to, we find these now. And it's a relatively new product. It's only a few years old on the market, but it's exponentially growing, and they contain batteries and electronics. And we've even seen, I was looking this morning actually, and there are websites for these vaping products that are literally saying the words, you don't have to worry about a dead battery because they're disposable. Literally telling people to throw these things, just throw it away is the actual quote. So they're telling people to throw an electronic with a battery in the trash, which is banned from disposal in California. So there's a lot of misinformation out there that's directing the public to put these in the trash. And I can tell you from any waste hauler's perspective, or a landfill operator, or municipality that runs their own trucks, we're seeing more fires in the waste system than we ever have before. And we think it's a lot due to products like this, which contain batteries and are being thrown readily in the trash. So I do want to just, we can reduce the slides now, but when the authors and sponsors, we all look forward to working directly with the stakeholders. This bill currently does not have a date as to when this would go into effect. We truly hope to work with all the stakeholders to come up with the right date and encourage everybody's participation in that effort. And if you care to participate in that, you can reach out to us. There have been bans passed on tobacco sales, flavored tobacco products. That is not what this is about, but it's all related in that there's a lot of momentum around dealing with tobacco issues. And this is one very big issue that's been a litter problem for literally 50 years, and it's time to resolve it. So I just want to thank again all the authors, all the supporters. This is our time to get this done. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Assemblymember Mark Stone, who's been a champion of keeping California healthy and clean for a very long time. And he represents the beautiful Santa Cruz and Monterey coastline, some of the most beautiful coastline in the world, and hosts also the Monterey Aquarium, which has worked for many, many years to reduce single-use plastic pollution of the ocean. So right now I'll turn it over to Assemblymember Stone. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. And thank you to Luz Rivas for bringing this bill forward this year. It should not come to as a surprise to anyone that the tobacco industry has been lying to us for decades. As soon as the link between cigarettes and lung cancer was made known, they started an ad campaign to give the public the impression that they could make a safer product, and they put filters on their cigarettes. And the fact is that those filters do really nothing for the outcomes, the health outcomes of the individuals who are smoking. And yet they have a devastating impact on the environment, because probably about 5 years ago, we started on this journey and looking at the policy to ban filters. And it was a policy not taken very seriously by environmentalists, by health advocates, by really anyone who you would expect to be conscious of the issue of plastic pollution in the environment. And the biggest pushback was that it seemed like by taking the filters off the cigarettes, we would then be creating a more dangerous product. But science is showing that the opposite is true. There is some science that is coming to develop that shows that because of the way smokers draw from cigarettes, filterless and filtered, that with the filter on the cigarette, they're getting different types of cancers and potentially more aggressive types of cancers. So it is a complete fallacy to think that the filters do anything other than provide a marketing advantage for the cigarette companies. Now, in talking to, having worked on this for a number of years, talked to a lot of smokers, and smokers say that they smoke and they toss. And we've looked at replaceable filters and reusable filters. We've looked at other options, but the smokers, they smoke and they toss, and they risk a $1,000 fine by flicking a cigarette out of a vehicle or throwing a cigarette out onto a beach or out into the environment anywhere. And that's not a deterrent at all. In fact, the cigarette filters in the environment are so ubiquitous that people stop seeing them. Once I started having these conversations with colleagues years ago about looking for cigarette filters, a lot of folks didn't really seem to understand the extent to which that pollution actually happens. And once you start to look at the environment, go take a look at the Capitol grounds, go take a look at your local park, your beach, where you'd overlooked cigarette filters and this level of pollution for years. But once you're cognizant of it, you start to see them again and again and again. It is the most ubiquitous pollution that is picked up on beach cleanup days and river cleanup days and park cleanups. It's disgusting. And when you think of less than 12% of Californians are smokers, that amount of pollution that is so pervasive is just absolutely astonishing. So what can we do? We can take some various steps like removing the filters from the cigarettes, having no health outcomes at all on the smokers themselves, but having a great benefit to our environment. We can then shift that perspective to this burgeoning vaping industry. And whether it's cannabis or not, we need to incentivize choices in how those products are delivered so that we do not create this same level of ubiquitous pollution that we have over the years with cigarette filters. That's what this bill is about. And now that attention is finally being paid to the significance of the environmental impact of cigarette filters and single-use vaping devices, and some real opportunities in front of us to change policy and make sure that we are being responsible to our environment while still allowing some of those products that a lot of us would love to ban the cigarette itself, but that's not what this is about. It is harm reduction. It is taking away a product that is proven to be dangerous in the environment and ensuring that we're taking absolutely every step possible to have a cleaner environment and have safer waterways for animals, for our kids, for our pets, and for the future of California. So now I'm going to turn it over to someone else, another coastal legislator from Orange County, Assemblywoman Connie Petrie Norris.
Thank you, Assemblymember Stone. Good morning. I am Assemblywoman Connie Petrie Norris, and I represent California's 74th Assembly District. I am here today as a proud joint author of AB 1690. Like Assemblymember Stone, I regularly have an opportunity to host community beach and waterway cleanups all across my district. And invariably, we always find hundreds of cigarette filters discarded in the sand and the brush. And we know that's not just true here in Southern California. Cigarette filters are one of the major sources of litter on beaches, oceans, and in waterways all around the world. As we're seeing now with the rise of single-use vape pens, it is no surprise that we've also begun to see them as well on our beaches and impacting our waterways. And their impact is every bit as bad and even worse. The plastic in these single-use vapes will never degrade. The leftover nicotine liquid is toxic, and the lithium-ion batteries cause dangerous fires. As a mom, I find it so sad to see my kids' friends. I've got 2 teenage boys. So sad to see these kids being duped into thinking that these single-use vape pens are somehow safe. As a legislator, I really do feel a great sense of responsibility to act and to do something about this. Bottom line is that it is high time for us to stop this toxic waste at the source. This legislation will help us keep our communities clean, our oceans free from chemical harm, and our kids healthier. So I want to say a big thank you to Assemblymember Rivas for your leadership on this issue, and look forward to working with you and the phenomenal coalition of legislators and supporters that you have put together to move this bill forward and to get this over the finish line. Thank you, and I'd like to now welcome Dr. Thomas Novotny, who is the CEO of the Cigarette Butt Pollution Project and a professor at San Diego State University. Welcome, Dr. Novotny.
Thanks, Assemblywoman Petrie Norris. It's a pleasure to provide a few bits of information about this tobacco waste problem that we've been studying for over the last decade or so, and I have come up with some more findings that I think are relevant to consideration of this legislation, which is very important, which will undoubtedly lead across the nation as California goes. Many other places will go, including New York State, which has been also already mentioned. I think it's important to know that of those 6 trillion cigarettes that are sold each year globally, over 12 billion are sold here in California, and 98% of those are filtered. Very few people smoke unfiltered cigarettes because they're harsh, because they're not pleasant to smoke. So that's another added benefit. By removing the filter, it will actually discourage people from smoking and perhaps even discourage people from taking up smoking as a young person. I think the other important thing to notice is that the plastics issue is something that California is also leading the nation on. A couple of bills have been passed previously, SB 1422 and 1263, that called for paying attention to the plastics that go into the environment through the waste streams. And certainly cigarettes, tobacco products, vapes, all non-biodegradable plastic issues are going to be component of this. In fact, the Clean Water Act from 2015 and the trash amendment that was added to it calls for nothing greater than 5 millimeters to go into the stormwater system, which would include a cigarette butt. Even though many of these, again, are crushed and sort of made into microplastics, they are the responsibility of communities then to prevent cigarette butts from going through the stormwater system, either through full capture or source reduction, which is what this bill is about, actually. Prohibiting the sale of filtered cigarettes and single-use pipes will really help local jurisdictions. One of the other pieces of research that we've done is economic, where we've been able to model the cost of cleanup. That is the direct cost that of picking up and managing these things. And this is significant for cities in California. In 2009, San Francisco actually figured it was about $20 million a year. This is what's called an externality, meaning that these costs are borne by taxpayers, by communities, by voluntary groups who do all these voluntary cleanups every month in the case of Surfrider. That's a cost, that's an opportunity cost. And these are not accounted for in the price of cigarettes right now. One of the things that can be done, again, is source reduction to reduce those costs of cleanup and the responsibility that communities have to prevent the waste products and the plastic from entering into the storm drain system. We've done an additional work on what people believe about the cigarette filter. Assemblymember Stone mentioned this. Most smokers don't know that they're made of plastic. There's an information gap here that I think will really help this bill and other kind of regulatory approaches. But it's important to know that people just don't know that this plastic device is part of the cigarette. And in fact, the industry, has 3 reasons for attaching it to the cigarette. One, it's actually cheaper to make a cigarette with a plastic filter than it is to have fully tobacco as part of the product. And second, it does deceive smokers into thinking that they're improving somehow. The word filter itself, it's a misnomer, it's a fraud, because it does not, again, filter out all the toxins that people inhale. And third, it makes it easier to smoke, as I've mentioned. And that makes it an attractive marketing tool, which we don't need. So I just think it's important to consider both the environmental part, but also the public health aspects of banning the sale of filtered cigarettes. I think we're going to be better off on all fronts. I'd like to next turn this presentations over to Nick Malice, who's with the Trash Free Seas program at the Ocean Conservancy, who does wonderful cleanups as part of the International Coastal Cleanup every year. Nick, take it away.
Thank you so much, Dr. Novotny, and thank you all for having me today. I will keep it brief so we have time for Q&A, but I want to start and note what Assemblymember Stone mentioned, where cigarette butts have become so prolific that we almost don't see them, but they are there. And cigarette filters are by far the most common item found around the world each year during Ocean Conservancy's International Coastal Cleanup. And that holds especially true in California, where during each year's California Coastal Cleanup Day, butts and filters represent approximately 30% of all items cleaned from the beaches. And yes, cigarette filters may be small, and we well established today that they are made of plastic, that celluloacetate. And that plastic is very slow to degrade in the ocean. And the science is now very clear that these plastics are a major source of plastic pollution. In fact, a study published last year estimated that 300,000 tons of microplastics enter the aquatic environment each year from cigarette filters. And the science also shows that cigarettes leach harmful chemicals such as nicotine and arsenic, and we know that these chemicals can be acutely toxic to aquatic organisms such as fish. These microplastics also are not just doing untold amounts of harm and damage to ocean and the wildlife depend on it, but we also now know that we are consuming microplastics as humans every day through the water we drink and the food we eat, like seafood. Ultimately, preventing plastic pollution is far more effective and less expensive than end-of-life cleanup, which will never fully capture the chemicals and pollution from tobacco waste entirely. And California has already led the nation to address plastic pollution, from banning plastic carryout bags and reducing single plastic foodware. And so banning the sale of cigarette filters and single-use vapes will go a long, long way in cleaning up our ocean and the iconic California coast. So thank you very much. And now I'll turn it back over to Assemblywoman Rivas for concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you to all the panelists, my colleagues that joined us today. You know, there's 18 of us in total that have signed on to this bill. And, you know, we're committed to getting this legislation through and moving it through. You know, we want to reaffirm California's global leadership on health and environmental policies. And I really think that with AB 1690, we'll keep California healthy and clean. So let's not waste this opportunity. Again, thank you for being with us today. We'll now open it up if there are any questions from the press.
Okay, looks like we do have one question so far. I'm going to open it up. Why are cigarette filters being banned if they protect the public health?
I can take that. I
Heidi?
think Assemblymember Stone to actually address this.
Mhm.
They're actually called filters, and actually Dr. Novotny did as well, and he can probably speak in great detail about this, but they are not protective of public health. In fact, we knew this back in 1964, a year after I was born, that these were not health protective. So that is a big myth that is driving people to think it's safer to smoke cigarettes with filters. But the truth is, it's really used more to manipulate the cigarette and keep it away from your face, the burning end. So, and as Member Stone said, we've seen different types of cancer show up because you're pulling hot, toxic air through tiny plastic filaments, and they can release toxics too. Plastics are not benign. They're made with a lot of dangerous chemicals. So it's just a lose-lose. And we want people to know that, because it's really not helping them be safer and healthier at all. It's actually adding to their, and sometimes people tend to breathe deeper, we understand, when they have a filter, thinking it's safer. And that also could be adding to the health issues.
Both the National Cancer Institute and U.S. Surgeon General's reports have thoroughly reviewed whether there's any benefit to the cigarette design since the last 50, 60 years with the filters being added on, and have concluded that, in fact, the incidence of adenocarcinoma has gone up, whereas other cancers that don't depend on the filters sort of impact have gone down. So it is actually, we think, you know, because it facilitates smoking and makes it easier for people to start and less likely for them to quit, it's a health hazard.
Thank you. And another question we have, does this bill preempt local governments from banning additional tobacco products?
No, there's nothing in this bill that does any preemption of any local ordinances.
Another question we have, why ban filters instead of focusing on cleanup throughout the state, potentially paid for by the industry?
I can take that too, if that's okay. The cleanup costs are always going to be much more expensive than prevention. Pollution prevention first. That's always been our mantra. That's what we're trying to get to with this bill. And you can't clean this up. There is no way to get 100% cleanup. These also leach toxic chemicals into the water, and there is no way to get them out. And the same with microplastics. There's no way to filter those out of the water.
Let me just add to that. We've seen cleanup efforts. We've seen a lot of an attempt to put some of the cleanup costs on the industry. They have always failed, so they're not going to work. This notion is protecting from the beginning and just taking that opportunity out of the equation, which is economically a much stronger option. And it doesn't push these additional extreme costs out onto the taxpayers, which always is what ends up happening.
And I think we've learned time and again that prevention is more efficient, more effective, and less expensive than a cure. And certainly that is the case here, which is why we want to really address this toxic waste at the source.
Great, thank you. We have another question here from McKenna Jenkins. Does this ban on single-use vapes include cannabis cartridges?
It does include cannabis products. So if it's covered, it doesn't matter what's in the product. If it covers the product, the actual, vaping product, then if it's cannabis or tobacco or anything else, it would be covered.
Yeah, if it's single use, right, correct.
Single use meaning non-rechargeable. But again, we're open to discussion. There's a lot of different products out there right now. They're coming on the market every day. So if you have information on different types of products and how to include them in definitions, let us know.
We have one more question. This is going to be our last question for today. But if media has additional questions, you can go ahead and send that to me and we can make sure we can get you an answer. I will drop my email in the chat. Similar types of legislation has failed in previous years. What are the barriers and reasons that block this bill, and what do we expect from the attempt this year?
I'll take that since I ran those bills in the past. We never could get it out of the GO committee here in the legislature. And really the reason for that is tobacco money and making it very difficult for legislators who take that money to be willing to look beyond their own interest and ensure that we can get something like this passed. So in the Assembly now, this bill will go to the Health Committee, which is where it's always belonged, and potentially even Natural Resources, again, because this is a natural resources issue. And growing awareness over the years. When we first ran this, people were really misunderstanding the health impact of filters and the negative detriment in the environment. And I think over the years, those have become much more plain. And if you look at this coalition that's being built around this bill, I think we have a much stronger realization of impacts of single-use products, including cigarette filters. And that knowledge will get us a much better ability to have reasonable debate in the legislature and best opportunity for success.
I think that there's an appetite for this legislation because of the previous efforts that have been done in other years, like with Assemblymember Mark Stone, that has bi-coastal support. Like I mentioned, New York is also running this bill. And so we believe that this is the right time. We also have a strong coalition, both the Assembly and the Senate, that have joined us.
Thank you, everyone. And just for a clarification, I will be sending out a press release after the event, and I will turn it back to the Assemblywoman to just conclude.
Okay, thank you to all of you for joining us today. And please feel free to reach out to my team with any additional questions. So thank you for everyone that's here today.